This Sunday we begin a two-part series I call A Tale of Two Widows. You see, Jesus is confronted with a trick question designed to make him look foolish, and a woman becomes nothing more than a prop. But Jesus refuses to play that game. He sees her dignity, he exposes systems that use people, and he proclaims God is the God of the living. No life is expendable. God sees the unseen and calls us to see them too. When I started my studying this week, I started learning about the chain of events surrounding the gospel passage. And I found that what's happening this week is happening probably on the Wednesday before Jesus' crucifixion. He came into town on what we call Palm Sunday and was cheered by the crowds. And then things went downhill rapidly from there. The powers that be feel threatened, and threatened power lashes out. They viciously turn against him and try either to trap him into essentially signing his own death warrant or trying to make him look stupid and foolish to the crowds. In their efforts for today's gospel, it's the make him look stupid ploy. But underneath this trap lies something more profound. We'll see that played out over this week's reading and the next. The 2 weeks are linked, I think, and I saw them linked by two women. Actually, both are widows. So I thought of the Charles Dickens title, A Tale of Two Cities, except I thought A Tale of Two Widows. Well, that made me wonder what on earth that story was about, and if the title would make sense, because you may remember that my track record on Dickens' works is not that great. But thank goodness for the internet. I found that the story was amazingly right on target, and it too was about class, the unseen and abused, forgiveness, sacrifice, and redemption. The more I read, the more I realized that's exactly what's happening in Luke. So I kept the title and decided to do a two-part series. All the stories ultimately point to who gets seen, who is invisible, who is treated as expendable, and what it reveals about life and God. The Sadducees approached Jesus with a question. On the surface, it's a theological puzzle of a woman who suffers the loss of a husband and her economic security within the culture, and her situation is turned into a punchline and an attempted trick question for Jesus. A woman loses her husband and has to marry his 7 brothers in succession because they eventually all die on her. They set this up, and their question is, so, whose wife will she be after resurrection? But the question's not about understanding life after death. It's about power, control, and humiliation. And the woman in the story is just a prop. Her life should be the focus, but she is essentially invisible. She exists only to serve their argument. And in the end, through Jesus, we come to a better understanding of what true life is. This is a story that points to who society might view as expendable, and it echoes far beyond a first-century question. So how often in our world do we treat people as if they exist to serve our purposes, to make our institutions look impressive, to make our theology appear clever, to keep our systems running smoothly? Whether it's the ancient temple built on the backs of the poor and vulnerable, the medieval cathedrals built on the backs of widows and the poor, in corporations where low-wage workers are invisible, or in households or organizations where certain voices are ignored, the same temptation exists to value utility over humanity. But Jesus refuses to play that game. He refuses to treat this woman, even though she's an illustration, as a piece of logic to be manipulated. Instead, he reframes the discussion in a revolutionary way. God is not the God of the dead. but of the living. For to God all of them are alive. He asserts that life is not measured by usefulness, by visibility, by status. Life is seen, honored, and valued by God, not by human institutions or clever arguments. We get the same idea in Job. Job has suffered immensely. He's been stripped of his family, his possessions, his health. He's crushed, alone, invisible to all those around him. And to make matters worse, everyone believes it's his own fault and due to some sin he's committed, and that if he would just admit it, it would all stop. But he declares, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, even though my body is destroyed, I'll see God. But Job's vision is not abstract. It's not about theology as a weapon. It's about hope, dignity, and the recognition of life and God's presence even in, and especially in, suffering. Like Jesus' teaching, Job asserts that every life has value even when the world can't see it. Resurrection changes how we see life. Through Jesus, life continues in God, and that means that people are never expendable. Using people, no matter if it's by institutions, theology, or economics, flies in the face of resurrection and the way of true living that Jesus is trying to share with us. Sometimes churches celebrate their beautiful buildings, while the single mother cleaning them is invisible. When we treat someone as disposable, we act as though their value ends when their usefulness ends. That is the opposite of the living God's truth. God sees the living. God honors the unseen. Resurrection is not just a future hope. It shapes how we interact with people right now. And here's the invitation. Here's the challenge, the mission. To live as one who believes God sees them. To recognize that our value is not what a person produces, not in their social position and not in their wealth, but in their inherent dignity and their life God has given them. Resurrection is already true, and that faith, that reality propels us to honor those who are invisible, overlooked, or used as props. When we live honoring that reality, we bear witness to God's living power. So the Sadducees attacked Jesus on the basis of their disbelief and resurrection and tried to make him look foolish and afforded Jesus yet another teachable moment. In his response, our understanding of resurrection can grow and inspire us in our work and in our mission in God's kingdom. We find that the question is not just, what do I believe about life after death? It is, how do I live as someone who believes in the God of the living? How do I see people others ignore? How do I honor those the world overlooks? Who do I walk past without seeing? The world of the living sees the widows of the world, the overlooked, the minimalized, the ones who used as examples in someone else's argument. The God of the living sees the oppressed, the ignored, the overworked, and the invisible. The God of the living sees you. And because God sees, we are called to see too. Amen.